Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage CNBC reporter and anchor Hadley Gamble and her guest, Dr. Tomislav Mihaljevic.
Good afternoon, everybody, and once again, thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Hadley Gamble. I'm CNBC's anchor and reporter in the region, and we're very excited to be focusing today on healthcare systems of the future. Now, we only have about 15 minutes to chat about this, but I think we can get a lot done because we don't want to just talk about healthcare systems of the future, but we also want to talk about the healthcare systems of now. Because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is 5 million Palestinians who don't have access to basic health care. So before we move on down the pike and talk about the potential for bringing something as enormous and significant as the Cleveland Clinic potentially to Palestine, let's focus on how we get those basic needs addressed. I'm joined now by the CEO and president of the Cleveland Clinic, Tom Mihaljevic.
Yeah,
Almost got that right.
close.
Walk us through your vision for what could be achieved, given the investment sentiment that we've seen over the last several hours, particularly from the private sector.
Yeah. Well, I believe that a lot can be achieved clearly in the region. First of all, I think there are very specific needs when it comes to the population in Gaza and the West Bank. As we've heard so many times, it's a predominantly very young population. When it comes to healthcare, probably the best focus and immediate need is in family care, primary care, and preventive care. That is really what the population needs at the most right now.
Obviously, in the region itself, healthcare is a very, very exciting investment destination, frankly. But when we talk about what's happening in the Palestinian territories, we're not talking about some of the lifestyle diseases that are challenges, particularly for the GCC countries, right? We're not talking about diabetes as much. We're not talking about obesity. We are talking about basic things. We're talking about cancer. We're also talking about the need, the very, very serious need for heart doctors, brain doctors, things that they just don't have access to. And when you take a step back here, I mean, you're very familiar in your role with healthcare systems and with the potential for investment. How do we get those needs met in the short term so then you can focus on the broader picture?
Well, I think we have a reason for healthy optimism when it comes to healthcare in a broader region, and in particular when it comes to the healthcare in Gaza and West Bank. And the reason for it is because in our profession, in healthcare, we as a healthcare professionals adhere firmly to the values that transcend geographies, religions, and we work really, really well together, regardless of our countries of origin, regardless of our convictions. So I think there's a lot that can be gained by an expertise in the region and through the collaboration with established centers in the region. When it comes to the education of Palestinian healthcare workers, I believe that similarly we can really, really help a lot by developing a healthcare workforce of the future for Palestine.
Walk me through what this looks like in terms of an investment.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, Cleveland Clinic is in Abu Dhabi, but they're backed by Mubadala, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, well, different regions and different populations require different types of healthcare. Once again, when it comes to Palestine and Palestinian people, the predominant healthcare challenges are different than in certain other geographies. So knowing that the healthcare of the people, of the population, is typically much more determined by what we call social determinants of health, such as an availability of healthy food, water, adequate housing. That is really, and immunization, that is really what we need to focus on immediately. I think that's really, really what the country needs. When it comes to healthcare professionals, their education can be accomplished in a number of different ways. First is through education in nearby healthcare organizations. But today with the digital technology, we can do a lot by sharing the best practices and the knowledge across the borders with a relatively little investment and with greater efficacy.
How does that play out in the real term, though? Because at the end of the day, we talk about using technology to make healthcare more efficient. We talk about that in the global context, but we're talking about a very basic need right now, at least for the Palestinians, before they can even get to that point.
Yes.
Where do you see the organizations coming into play here? Because it's got to be governments, it's got to be external investment, it's got to be the insurance companies as well, because at the end of the day, that's been part of this drive for healthcare in the region has been the move to private insurers.
Yeah, well, before we go to the insurers, I think the first step comes from the governments, and the first step comes from the greater society, as well as the healthcare providers in the neighboring regions. This is really where we have those players, so to say, that need to band together in order to provide what is necessary right now.
You have a great audience of investors in this room and those watching this streaming online as well, because there's a lot of international interest today. And these folks are all looking for returns. When you look at this from your role as a CEO, where are those opportunities at this point, do you think, at the base level? Walk us through this, because I think that's something that everybody would be curious to know.
Well, I think it's probably the most important fundamental issue is to understand that the returns cannot be looked into in a traditional ways, like in most other businesses. We have to start with a healthy notion that the health of the economy and the health of the nation depends upon the health of its people. So the returns on investments are indirect. They are not direct. I don't think that we can plan a future for any nation if we ignore the needs of healthcare for that nation.
And in terms of those local partnerships, where would you start?
Well, I think we have a lot of excellent healthcare organizations in a broader region. Obviously, in Israel has a very good healthcare system. We have, in a broader region, a number of centers of excellence. I spent a lot of time in a greater region in Abu Dhabi, and I know how much can be done through collaboration with the centers of excellence.
What kind of international makeup are we talking about here? Because as you say, there are severe need for healthcare workers, whether they be nurses or doctors. And something that you've done quite well in Abu Dhabi is to bring together a real international community of healthcare providers to work with you.
Well, that is true. We have brought an international community of healthcare providers, but at the same time, we're also looking for sustainability of our efforts. And sustainability of those efforts can come only through education. So education of nursing caregivers, educations of healthcare professionals of all different kinds, physicians, nurses, technicians. That can be done through collaboration. I mean, all the medical schools and nursing schools in the region would certainly be more than open to collaborate for the needs of the Palestinian people.
And so you would advocate then having perhaps an exchange, a university approach?
Absolutely.
When you think about what happens next in terms of the broader region, in terms of the healthcare system, one thing can easily feed into another. Your partnerships that you have created in Abu Dhabi and creating that kind of international healthcare system, where else do you see opportunities? Because you still have such a large population that head out of the GCC, head out of the Middle East more broadly. They go to Europe, they go to the United States, they're looking for better healthcare. When are we going to hit that level when you see those numbers evening out?
Well, I'm very optimistic about the future of healthcare in the region. And the reason why I'm optimistic is because with our experience in Abu Dhabi, we have demonstrated that we can replicate the excellence of healthcare 7,000 miles away from the United States. And we've been able to replicate it through the visionary leadership in the United Arab Emirates, through the support to our efforts, and through collaboration and investments into education of young Emiratis who are now viewing healthcare as a profession that they would like to get into. And by doing it, we have actually reversed the trend. We have reversed the trend where people with healthcare needs used to view airport as a first healthcare destination. So they were forced to fly abroad for their healthcare. Right now, we're seeing patients from more than 80 different countries actually fly to Abu Dhabi for care. And the reason why I'm using Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi as an example, because I do believe that type of, if you will, healthcare diplomacy can be replicated in a number of different locations.
Expand on that for me, because that's something that we talk about so often in terms of not just the healthcare, but also the technology sharing, the knowledge-based economy. We're even seeing that in the future of space and investing in space, how that can bring you beyond borders, as you might say. Yeah. Walk me through that in terms of what could potentially happen with the Palestinians and potentially Israeli facilities as well? Where do you see the connections?
Yeah, well, the connections, so there are a few things that I would like to state about our healthcare that are probably not well known for people outside of our industry. There are probably two major trends in healthcare that we're seeing today. First is an explosion in knowledge. The number of new information generated in biomedical sciences doubles every 18 months. What that means is that we have many more treatments available for our patients. We have new technologies springing out every single day. But it also means that we have to get a substantially greater investments into our informatics infrastructure in order to share that information and use it. The second big trend in healthcare that we see is a trend that affects a large population across the globe, and those are lifestyle diseases. Actually, the most prevalent disease today, the most prevalent disease of mankind is obesity. And all the consequences of obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, musculoskeletal diseases, and so on. But I'm very optimistic about the future of healthcare because I think that now, in contrast, let's say to 10 to 15 years ago, we can share our knowledge and share our information and deliver care much easier with the use of digital technology and new digital platforms. And we have used it heavily as we got into Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. For example, second opinions can be obtained from Cleveland Clinic from any point, any corner in the world, almost instantaneously.
We talk about the plan that has been outlined here at the Peace to Prosperity workshop. We're talking about $50 billion invested over the next decade. If you look at that kind of money and you think about what could be done with a portion of that towards healthcare, towards integrating healthcare across the GCC, across the Middle East and North Africa, where could we be if we put that money to work right now?
Well, I think we can do a lot for health of the nation. I think that the amount of money that was outlined and allocated for healthcare could really go a long way to address the real needs of Palestinians. And if I take a look at one illustration, something that I think everyone here in this room should be very passionate about, it's infant mortality, for example. The infant mortality in Gaza and West Bank is about 5, 6, 7 times higher than it is in developed countries. And I think the allocation of appropriate resources to address those pressing issues of a young population could take us really, really a long way.
And this has got to be a top-down approach. Is this a leadership issue? Is this an investor issue? How do you see the collaboration working there? Because in your job, you deal with this quite a bit.
Yeah. Primarily, in my opinion, it is a leadership issue. And it is also an issue that requires a healthy understanding that the improvement of healthcare systems requires persistence over time and requires a long-term view. And for that, one needs to have a vision of leadership.
You could be describing the peace process itself.
Yes.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us. The future of healthcare and the future of healthcare certainly in the Middle East.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Emily.